My name is Andrea Mooney, and my case study was on my longtime friend being called Antonio for purposes of the case study. He was born in Houston, Texas. His parents immigrated here from Monterrey, Mexico. This is actually the capital of the state of Nuevo León in Mexico. And Spanish is his primary language, English is his secondary language. About Antonio, he is 27 years old and still resides in Texas, where he was born. Majority of his family still lives in Mexico, and he continues to visit as often as possible. His father, since moving here, has acquired English, but his mother still has not. She only speaks Spanish. He learned Spanish from his family and most of the English from his friends. He did have a little bit of schooling, but he acknowledges most of his English learning from his friends. He grew up in the Klein ISD school system, was enrolled in ESL classes until about the 8th grade. Now he attends San Jacinto Community College and actually works as a bounty hunter, where he uses a lot of his bilingualism. Learning English, Antonio, he was only allowed to speak Spanish at home. Because of this, he did not want to learn English originally. He didn't see a need. At home, he spoke Spanish. To his family, he spoke Spanish. And as a kid, that's all you need to talk to. At school, he was in ESL classes, but he did not have to speak English constantly. They did not require them to do this. He was allowed to speak Spanish. But unfortunately, in middle school, he was bullied for not knowing English. Talking to him about it was honestly kind of emotional. He remembered everything that they'd said, and I guess some of it was stuff that he had blocked out. But soon enough, he made friends with his English-speaking neighbors. They were just the people who lived closest to him, who happened to be around the same age. And they taught him enough English to stand up for himself. And after that moment, he wanted to learn and master the entire English language. By the end of middle school, he recalls becoming completely proficient. I saw the effective filter hypothesis in Antonio because his filter was high when he was being bullied. He wasn't safe at school. He didn't feel safe at school. So his anxiety was up. Therefore, he was not actually being able to comprehend the English that his ESL classes were trying to teach. But once he gained this confidence from his new friends, he was able to increase his language skills. I feel like this can be used a lot in the modern day classroom. It's sad, but unfortunately it happens to children. So we need to make sure not only to keep out on an eye for bullying, but we need to keep an eye out for noticing our children's self-esteem, watching how they act in the classroom, making sure that that effective filter is not too high where they can be comprehending what we are saying to them. Motivation, as far as the bullying, was very, very important in Antonio's success of learning the English language. He specifically attributes all of his English skills to his friends. His friends taught him how to do this because he needed to overcome the bullying. Without this, he thinks that he never would have learned English. He was not paying attention in school because of his effective filter, and all that mattered to him at the time was learning English to overcome the bullies. So as far as motivation is concerned, in the modern day classroom, we need to be aware of the intrinsic and extrinsic motivation of our students, our regular students, but also our ESL students. More importantly, this can make or break a student's success in school and learning the language. If we know their motivations, we can build a strong relationship and hopefully encourage them to learn their English or whatever else we're trying to teach them. His family, which was interesting to me, had a different motivation. His father moved here from Mexico. He wanted a better life for his family. He needed English in order to survive and get a better job. Therefore, he is successfully bilingual. He is proficient in both language. His mother, however, was a stay-at-home mom. His dad worked, his mom just stayed in the house. And when him and the kids were in the house, all they spoke was Spanish to her. So she had no reason necessarily to learn English. And you can see this by the fact that she still has not learned English. She understands, according to Antonio, about 20% of English, and that's understanding. My methodology for the case study, there were 3 interviews. 2 of them were get to know you, asking important questions, learning his background, and the last one was his proficiency testing. I tested his reading, writing, speaking, and listening skills, also monitoring his comprehension, listening, vocabulary, grammar, and pronunciations. So I had a proficiency rating from TELPAS and the Solom Matrix. When I asked him about his own self-assessments, he was confident in all areas. He feels like he is fully bilingual and proficient still in both languages. He did not lose his Spanish. But it was interesting, when he sees an unfamiliar word, he tends to automatically pronounce it using Spanish phonemes first, such as the difference between our e and e vowels in each language. So his mind, his unconscious, automatically goes to that Spanish because it's his L1. Sometimes he confuses the double R or the rolled R sound, the R, and our regular R in English when he's speaking too quickly. He tends to roll them whenever they don't need to be rolled in English. And he pointed out he has difficulty spelling words that are pronounced differently from how they sound, such as Wednesday. That was the hardest word for him. I might pronounce it Wednesday because I know how it's spelled. But to someone just hearing the day of the week, Wednesday, you don't hear that D. The D is almost silent. So that was a big struggle for him. He says that in Spanish, most words are spelled exactly how they sound. So it's easier to spell out vocabulary in Spanish than it is in English. As far as his results, according to TELPAS, all of his ratings were advanced high. He has been using the language for a while. But it was interesting to point out in his listening, he did not know what quarter till meant. So I'm guessing that they don't use this in Mexico, so it's something he had never heard as far as telling time. But he did understood the main points and was able to recognize important details. As far as speaking, there were a few vocabulary words that he used incorrectly. The most specific one to me was talking about a girl dyeing her hair, but he said that she painted her hair, and this is not correctly how we would use it in English, because no one takes a paintbrush and paints their hair. We say dyed. They dyed their hair. He also said that a video game was born, and born is used in English for the creation of some kind of life versus just creating a video game. So we would say, a native English speaker would say that the video game was created, not born, because it was not born of something. However, these small errors did not interfere with communication, so he's still in advanced high. His writing, he showed complexity and detail. He self-corrected his mistakes whenever he knew he was spelling something wrong. He automatically thought about it, erased it, and fixed his mistakes. So definitely demonstrated great and age-appropriate writing. His reading, he read and understood vocabulary and constructed meaning of the text. So he was advanced high in all of the levels for TELPAS. As far as Solom, I did rate him a 4 in his vocabulary because he occasionally used inappropriate terms. They were minor, but they were enough to where if you were not used to hearing him speak or used to hearing an ESL speaker use the incorrect terms, you might have been thrown off a little bit. As far as the painted hair and the video game being born, I feel like someone who's not used to ESL speech would have asked him to clarify because those verbs do not belong there. I did have to rephrase a few ideas, but it wasn't a lot. As far as pronunciation, rating, fluency, and comprehension, he was a 5. He had the intonation approximate to a native speaker. Even though he didn't feel like his pronunciation was going to be up to par, I feel like it was. I understood his words very clearly. And in conclusion, Antonio learned English mainly through social context and motivation from his peers, both positive and negative. It was a bullying motivation, but he turned that around to make it a positive, to where that was his sole motivation for learning the language. and he had great friends to help him out. He acquired most of his English knowledge in middle school and now is successfully bilingual in both languages. And as you can see on the picture, that is him with his fugitives that he catches through bounty hunting. So he definitely uses his bilingualism in the workforce. He learned most of his English as a child and continues to grow his vocabulary as his education level increases. And it's important to note here, we see his affective filters, anxiety in the classroom, and the intensity of the motivation between him, his mother, and his father, all the different motivations that I saw, they must all be considered when teaching ESLs. We want them to be as successful as possible. They probably have the same goal in mind. It is just a matter of finding this motivation and guiding them. So, thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy.